Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished and respected professional from New York, USA, Eliza Yvette Esquivel. Eliza, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a delight to be here.
Thank you. Eliza is the founder of Love and Order and Radical Sabbatical Consulting. So, Eliza, before we talk about consulting, tell me about your own journey in brief.
Yes, I will. Thank you. So I'm originally from Texas. I moved to New York about 24 years ago to start a career in global advertising. I had studied English literature in school and got my master's degree in communication. During the course of my 24-year career, I've worked both client side and agency side. So I was on the client side, a senior director at Microsoft and also vice president of global brand strategy at Mondelez. And then I've had a range of agency experiences from Barbarian to TBWA to Future Brand to Whited & Kennedy Amsterdam and a couple of other agencies. So I've had that experience. And I've had the great fortune of working on some of the world's, largest global brands from Coke, Nike, McDonald's. I've also worked on a lot of the tech brands, Facebook, now Meta, and Amazon, and all kinds of brands in between. So I've had a range of experiences. And as you noted, I recently had a big career shift where I've stepped away from working for other people and building something for myself and begun my solopreneur journey. And I've also started writing my first book, which will be about accessing your own innate power. And then for your listeners, because I know that a good portion of them are from India, I thought it would also be worth noting some things about myself that most people don't know. One is that my master's thesis, the subject of my master's thesis was spirituality in America, advertising to boomers and Generation Y. And, I am a lifelong meditator. I started meditating in 1989. And in my 20s, I spent 6 years as part of an ashram community studying under Sri Chinmoy, who grew up in the Sri Aurobindo ashram, in Pondicherry. So, a lot of it's a more modern approach to what you learn in Auroville. Absolutely. So I do have that background.
Fantastic. And Pondicherry is a beautiful place. I don't know if you've been there, but
no, I haven't had the fortune.
You should have. So, Eliza, let's now talk about the two areas you consult in. One is Love and Order, and the other is Radical Sabbatical Consulting. But let me start with my first question, and that is, can you share the founding story of Love and Order and what inspired you to take this unique name?
Yeah, so I knew that I wanted to go on my own. And I really didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. But because I've worked in naming in the past, I know that when you name something, a name is really a promise. Oftentimes it focuses on the emotional benefit of what you're offering. And so I just gave some thought to what I wanted my clients to feel when they work with me and sort of what the experience of working with me would be like. And when I started, sort of marinating on that, immediately the idea of Love and Order came to mind. I'm a very passionate person. I'm a very caring person. Also, I'm a strategist, so I can, create, clarity and simplicity for very complex problems. So the name just sort of bubbled out of me. And then once I had the name, it was easier then to define what the offering was, because all I had to do was think about, well, what do I really love doing? And of all the things I've done in my career, what do I really have love for? And the two things are future forecasting, and the other is working with leaders and leadership teams. So that's what Love and Order became, was future forecasting for leaders and leadership teams, but particularly a very specific point of view in the future that I'm hugely passionate about, which is about a protopian view of the future.
Fascinating. And what are some of the key methodologies of Love and Order in empowering visionary leadership?
Yeah, so Love and Order is really about championing the long game. We see so much in the corporate world and the business world, the short-term imperatives, and the tyranny of the urgent are taking over. And there's a real need to take a long-term view of the future and also solve for what Monica Bilskite calls the crisis of the imagination when it comes to the way that we view the future. There's a couple of problems that we have right now in the way that we view the future, particularly in the business world. The first primarily being that much of our view of the future comes from a masculine perspective. A lot of science fiction and speculative fiction, mostly written by men, creating a very dystopian view of the future, replicating a lot of the existing models that we know no longer work for us. So I think that's the first problem. The second is that a lot of future forecasters assume two things: one, a consumer-driven society, and also a big tech-driven society. And there's a real central bias there that I think needs to be overcome. And then the third is, as I've mentioned, is we've got this crisis of the imagination where many of us are sort of just sleepwalking into the future, assuming that things will continue in a negative trajectory, worrying about what the worst things that can happen will be. And so that's, one of the main things that Love and Order wants to solve for. We do have a lot of dystopian things that we're facing, climate crisis, technological overreach, the widening social divide. And particularly, this is driven by a consumer society that lacks ethics, that lacks a sort of like an ecological view. So the methodologies in Love and Order sort of really want to, number one, create an awareness and address that sort of dystopian sleepwalking. But further, what we're doing is really calling for a new kind of leadership. And I've defined it as protopian leadership. So it's not just about having a worldview that is more about sustainability and inclusivity and human-centric values that focuses on incremental improvement that's within reach, but becoming the kind of leader and embracing the kind of leadership qualities that will be required in order to land that future. And so that is really not just about visionary leadership, but it's about conscious leadership. And it's about really sort of being an advocate and a voice for the future of humanity within your organization, a future that's really focused on progress, equality, and human well-being.
Great response. Thank you. And how does Love and Order help to shape strategic visions for the future?
So one of the things that I have brought to Love and Order is introducing something called the imaginal realm into the corporate world. Now, the imaginal realm is something that has existed in literature and that is understood there, but very little understood in, I think, in the business world. And really what the imaginal realm is sort of, it's not just the imagination, but it's almost entering into a sort of a dream state and co-creating a vision in that dream state. So rather than getting in a room and brainstorming and ideating, it's about letting go of logic, bringing in the mythic, bringing in the symbolic, using art, and allowing yourself to get into a more dreamlike state in order to imagine the future. So one of the ways that we're shaping strategy is by introducing these kinds of methodologies. We really have to dream together as a society and a culture, and we've sort of lost that ability. So I really want to bring that into the business world. And a way of doing that, obviously, is, using my background in meditation, which I mentioned. Also, I belong to an organization called the Vision Lab, which is based in Harvard at the Harvard Divinity School. And I've done a lucid dreaming experiment with them. So I really know how to use advanced visualization techniques to enter into these sort of waking dream states. And I want to bring those into the business world so that we can start envisioning a better future.
Fascinating. And in what ways does Love and Order collaborate with brands to foster innovation and sustainability?
So, besides the imaginal realm, it's really about championing approaches that mimic regenerative models in business. bringing in those conscious leadership approaches, which really are about a holistic and integral view, which would be sort of not just championing humanity, not just championing the planet, but the relationship between the two. And then also bringing in that broader impact measurement to bring to bear on innovation to make sure that everything that's happening in business is sustainable. So it's about kind of bringing in a much more integrative approach, using the human spirit as sort of the springboard, but bringing in a lot of that practicality as well.
Well said. My next question is, how does Love and Order navigate the balance between spiritual principles and business pragmatism?
Honestly, it's such a great question. I mean, because of my background, the business pragmatism is the easy thing. I'm adept at understanding how to tie initiatives to business objectives. I'm really adept at understanding what drives an organization, how organizations, are persuaded, so for example, Microsoft, very data oriented, Mondelez was like very much more literary and linguistic and evocative in the way that they approach things. So I think the business part is the easy part. Bringing in the spiritual principles is where the opportunity really lies, and right now we're in an era where we do have permission to talk about being human in the business world. We do have permission to start talking about the planet, but the spirit is the missing link. The relationship between being a human being and living on this planet, and what is our connection to each other, and also advancing the definition of a human being to include the spirit. I think that's like where, we're sort of on the edge in the business world to start doing that. Some of the ways that I like to do it is I talk about the natural world and natural laws. I talk about the forces that govern our world. I draw on inspiration from quantum physics, which is really starting to, address the issues of what is the nature of reality and what is consciousness, and certainly tapping into the art world, to psychology, to philosophy and myth. All those elements become sort of bridges to the spiritual. But in truth, as you may well know, the word spirituality is still a little bit taboo. But I'm starting to see openness to other concepts like presence, emergence and mindfulness. So there are other ways of sort of kind of like to touch the edge of the water there.
Fascinating. And how would you, or do you envision a role for Love and Order in shaping global leadership?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So I've written two free reports, which anybody can get on the website, that really sort of address this issue. And I feel like the new path forward is to operationalize protopian leadership into organizations, and that's really what Love and Order is here to do, to really introduce these ideas of using the imagination, of conscious leadership styles, of infusing our work with these inclusive values, embracing that long view. So my feeling is that we're going to have more and more leaders who sort of embrace these kinds of approaches. And when we do, we're going to begin to see more harmony within our organizations, within our society, and within the way that we govern. And, the way that change happens is, I'm a big fan of Michel Foucault, and, Foucault talks about power and how power moves in two directions. So it moves from the bottom up and also from the top down, and it's happening simultaneously. So really, being able to have, better global leaders, protopian global leaders, it also requires each individual to lead themselves and have those protopian values within their own lives. And so I think with a bottom up and top down approach, we're going to have new leadership in the world.
Very interesting. So Eliza, let's now move to Radical Sabbatical Consulting. And once again, love the name, but what are some of the core principles or philosophies that guide your approach in Radical Sabbatical Consulting?
Yeah. So first I'll say that Radical Sabbatical Consulting was born out of my own 2-year sabbatical that I took after leaving Microsoft.
Mhm.
And, originally I only planned to take 6 months off, and 6 months turned into 2 years. And during that time, it was not always easy to explain to people what I was doing. Or, people thought I was a little crazy for taking so much time off. So I really invented the name Radical Sabbatical at that time as a sort of humorous, cheeky way to tell people, what I was doing.
Mm.
But, what happened was that, um, after 6 months, I realized that I was in going through a process of self-discovery that I was really enjoying and that I really wanted to devote myself to. And coming out on the other end of it, what I'll say is that when you take that kind of a long career gap,
Mm.
after you've been at such a senior level of achievement, you walk out with tremendous clarity and insight.
Mm.
And so, what the core philosophy of Radical Sabbatical Consulting is born of that. And really, it's just this idea that the world has programmed all of us
Mm.
to work against our own well-being and authenticity.
Mm.
And this programming denies the truth of our own inner power and what we really are. So taking a radical sabbatical is basically taking a stance against that, and once and for all saying, no, I'm not going to participate in that anymore. And instead, I'm going to reclaim my authentic self. I'm going to reclaim my worth, and my capacity to tap into my own innate power on my own terms. And a radical sabbatical can happen in terms of really taking a career gap or taking a period of time off, but it can also happen just in terms of cultivating that mindset in your daily life. And that's what radical sabbatical
That's
consulting is
it.
all about.
That's it. And taking a sabbatical seems to be getting more and more common now. But my question to you, Eliza, is what are some common challenges people face when considering a sabbatical, and how do you help them?
Well, so, I'm sure anyone who's at an advanced state in their career will understand when I say that the more successful we are as professionals, the harder it seems to be able to feel like we can take time off.
Right.
We take on more responsibility. And so we feel, beholden to, all of these identities that we create and all this responsibility that we take on. And it gets harder and harder to see the return on an investment of taking some time off. We often fear losing income. We fear losing momentum. We fear not being able to hold on to our existing identity if we step away. Like, who will we, become? And we get so tapped into our sense of identity as a worker, or as our role in society, or as our role in with our social status,
Mm.
and we're scared to let that go. The other thing is that, the kind of sabbatical that I'm encouraging is really about completely letting go of the agenda and being productive and just letting yourself be. And that can be really, really scary,
Mm.
for people. It's really scary to sort of step into the unknown and let yourself be, to let yourself play, to let yourself, wander around, to sort of like live in a mystery, to live in uncertainty, to sort of not know what's going to happen every day when you wake up. And I think the biggest challenge is that people don't see the value in it, but also it's sad to admit, but a lot of people don't see that they're worth it. They
Mm.
don't value themselves enough to want to say, actually, I deserve to be able to return to that childlike freedom, and to sort of give myself this space to learn and grow and discover more just about myself without any other, agenda.
Mm.
But if people knew how powerful the experience was and how much it can do for our well-being and helping us tap into our true power, I think everybody would be lined up for it. So I think, all those are the challenges. And then what happens is that we let those challenges take over, and then we end up getting burnt out
Mm.
because we're not feeding that part of ourselves. So we suffer from burnout. And also what's going on in today's society, with the economy and all the rapid changes, is that organizations are having reductions in force all the time on a regular rotating basis because they're having to reorganize themselves. So a lot of advanced career professionals are finding themselves in the career gap because they let all of those obstacles prevent them from taking a gap. So, what I do for my clients is help them, kind of acknowledge that those obstacles are there and then have the bravery to overcome them. And make a plan to overcome them. But also I have clients who are actually fine with taking time off. They've already, kind of, Gen Xers in particular have sort of like adopted this pattern of like, I'm okay with taking a gap. The problem that they face is that it's really hard for them in that gap to let go of thinking and being the way that they had when they weren't in a gap. So a lot of times people are like, I'm going to take a gap, but they fill that gap with, okay, and so I'm going to travel and I'm going to upskill. And then, I'm going to figure out what I want to do next. And they don't really know how to sort of really let go. And that's also what I help my clients with is sort of like understanding what the letting go process looks like and giving them sort of like a framework so they don't feel totally lost in it, but can sort of give themselves that space.
Great response. And, it's always a challenge when you are considering a sabbatical, but I guess once you've taken it, then you probably pat yourself on the back and say, thank God I did it, because the positives are amazing.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, they really are.
So
yeah.
Tell me then, Eliza, what is the role in your view of meditation and mindfulness in the process of taking a radical sabbatical?
Well, so look, I have a 45-minute a day meditation practice, and I know that not everyone does. So I'm very, very realistic, about this. But the one thing that I really encourage all of my clients to do is a daily awareness practice that's really, really simple. And so what I encourage them to do is, for a fixed period of time during the day, let's say between 9 and 5, to set their alarm for every hour on the hour. And every hour on the hour to just take 1 minute to stop whatever it is they're doing or thinking and just be present in their body, to put their hand on their heart and just take a breath and to take stock of what they're thinking or feeling.
Yeah.
And if their mind is going along a track that is like not a great track, it's a moment for them to just change the channel to a more positive track. If they're feeling slightly dysregulated, it's a clue to them, you know what I mean, to sort of like take stock about what they want to do next during the course of their day. And doing something this simple as just doing that every hour for 1 minute is an absolute game changer, because it really, really raises your awareness about what's always going on in your head, how tense you may or may not be, all the time in your body, and sort of just like in general, how are you living your life? So I think that mindfulness and sort of presencing in the body is something that anybody can do. Of course, for anyone that comes to see me who is interested in meditation, I have a ton of resources to provide them. And I think the thing that I'll say also that I've learned over the years is that everyone meditates in a different way. Some people like the breath work, other people want the music, other people want visualization, other people need to do moving and walking meditation. And so, for anyone out there who's interested in meditation and they've tried it and it hasn't worked for them, I would say don't give up, because there are lots of different ways of getting into the meditative state. And the trick is to sort of find the one that best suits you.
Well said. And my last question to you, Eliza, how do you see the concept of the radical sabbatical evolving, especially in our very, very fast-paced world?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do think that there's some long-term trends that are working in the favor of radical sabbatical. I think that people are living longer. And there's more and more research being done about this sort of like, late career shift where people are moving from, from their traditional career to doing something that's more vocational and sort of taking these gaps to sort of go through the process of discovering that. So I think, sabbaticals are going to become more common for people. And I also think it's generational in the sense that I'm Gen X. I think our generation is sort of spearheading this. We were slackers in our 20s, so we were slow to get started, and we're more comfortable with that idea of taking time off. I know for sure millennials already have this idea that that it's not about work, it's about life, it's about experiences. So the idea of taking gaps is going to be very, very comfortable for them. So I think the generations are going to start driving this, and corporations are going to start catching on and offering sabbaticals. Already many corporations do offer them.
Yep.
And a lot of employees don't even know that their company does. So, and I think more and more of them will. And also, I feel like Europe is a little bit more advanced in the sense that they provide a safety net, financial safety net for career gaps. And right now, obviously, in the United States and other countries, we don't. But I think that we're going to start to catch on to this. And much of the changes are going to be accelerated by the advancement of AI and the way that it's going to displace and shift the workforce. So we're going to have more of people sort of taking gaps while we figure out how the new way of working. So I do think it's going to become, a thing.
Absolutely.
All coming for us.
And you're so right, Eliza. I'm a boomer, and I don't think it ever crossed anyone's mind in my generation that, hey, listen, we can take a gap here or we can take some time off. It was always stop working at 5 p.m. and start working next morning at 9 a.m. in some other organization.
Yes.
But on that note, Lisa, thank you so much for speaking to me about your own amazing journey. I'm fascinated about how well you have transitioned from such a senior corporate career to being on your own. Thank you for speaking to me about Love and Order. I think the way you have positioned Love and Order is so fascinating, and I'm sure many people in the corporate world will benefit from this. I loved your radical sabbatical terminology. I think sabbatical is something which is radical in any case, but as you said so rightly, it's now beginning to become a part of normal life between
Yes.
the Gen X and the millennials and the Gen Zs and maybe the forthcoming Gen Alpha and whatever else comes in the alphabet soup later on. But thank you again for speaking to me, and all the very best to you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.